You have eaten thousands of meals in your life. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks in between. And across all of those meals, across every restaurant, every grocery store, every family dinner you've ever sat at, you have almost certainly never eaten hippopotamus. Not once. And you probably never questioned that. It just feels obvious. Of course you don't eat hippos. They're wild animals. They're dangerous. They're not food. But here's the thing. That feeling, that quiet certainty that hippos aren't food, isn't coming from logic. It isn't coming from taste. It's coming from a decision that was made over a century ago by a small group of powerful men in a country that was starting to starve. And the story of why that decision failed will make you question everything you think you know about what counts as food. And who gets to decide? Stay with me until the end. Because the last part of this story doesn't just change how you think about hippos. It changes how you think about every single thing on your plate. Let's go back to the year 1910. The United States is in crisis, not a political crisis, not a war, a meat crisis. The American population has been exploding for decades. Millions of immigrants are arriving every year. Cities are growing faster than farms can feed them, and the price of beef, the backbone of the American diet, is skyrocketing. Newspapers are calling it the meat question. Imagine walking into a butcher shop in 1910. The shelves are sparse. The prices are eye-watering. Working-class families are going without. There are riots in New York over the cost of meat. The government knows it has a problem. And so Congress starts looking for solutions. Some people suggest expanding cattle ranching. Others suggest importing more livestock from abroad. And then a man named Robert Broussard stood up. And he had a completely different idea. Broussard was a congressman from Louisiana, and he had been watching a different crisis unfold in his home state, one that seemed, on the surface, completely unrelated to the meat shortage. Louisiana's waterways were being consumed by an invasive plant called water hyacinth. This plant had been introduced to the United States from South America, displayed at a cotton exposition in New Orleans in 1884. People thought it was beautiful. Within years, it was a catastrophe. Water hyacinth doubles in population roughly every 2 weeks. It was choking rivers, killing fish, blocking boats, destroying entire ecosystems. Farmers couldn't get their crops to market. Fishermen couldn't work. The waterways of the American South were being strangled, and nobody could stop it. The plant was too fast, too tough, too everywhere. But Broussard had read something interesting. In Africa, there was an animal that ate aquatic plants. An animal that could live in the swamps and bayous of Louisiana. An animal that produced enormous quantities of meat. And that animal was the hippopotamus. Broussard's idea was as bold as it sounds. Import hippos from Africa. Release them into the Louisiana bayous. They eat the water hyacinth. They multiply. Americans eat the hippos. 2 problems solved with 1 animal. He called it, and this is real, the American Hippo Bill. In 1910, this bill was formally introduced to the United States Congress, and it almost passed. Now, before you laugh, and I know you want to, consider how serious this was. This wasn't a fringe idea floated by one eccentric. Some of the most respected voices in American agriculture and exploration supported it. Frederick Russell Burnham was one of the most famous scouts and adventurers in American history. A man who had survived wars in Africa and the American West. A man who had seen the world. He testified in favor of the Hippo Bill. He argued that Americans were simply being squeamish, that the resistance to eating hippos was cultural, not rational. And he had a point, because people around the world had been eating hippos for a very, very long time. Ancient Egyptians hunted hippos along the Nile. Ancient hippo meat has been found at archaeological sites across sub-Saharan Africa, dating back tens of thousands of years. Communities across Central and West Africa ate hippo meat, and still do in some regions today. The meat is described by those who have eaten it as rich, dense, and somewhere between beef and pork. So the question isn't whether humans can eat hippos. The question is why Americans decided they couldn't. And here's where it gets fascinating. The Hippo Bill died in committee. It never became law, and the reason it died is more interesting than the bill itself. It didn't die because hippos are dangerous. Although they are, Hippos kill an estimated 500 people per year in Africa, making them one of the deadliest large land animals on Earth. It didn't die because the meat tasted bad. Almost nobody had tried it. It died because of something much more human. It died because of politics and identity, and the invisible rules that every culture writes about what counts as real food. Think about the world in 1910. America was building a national identity. Part of that identity was built on beef, cowboys, cattle drives, steakhouses, the American frontier. Beef wasn't just food. It was a symbol. Introducing hippo meat meant admitting that this symbol wasn't enough, that the system had failed, that you had to go looking in Africa for answers. And the powerful livestock industry, already entrenched, already wealthy, had no interest in competition from a giant African river mammal. So the bill was buried, and the idea of eating hippos became a joke. But here's what's fascinating. That moment, that quiet burial of an idea in 1910, tells us something profound about how food choices actually work. You did not choose to eat what you eat. Not really. You inherited it. Think about the foods that feel natural to you. Bread, chicken, rice, cheese, pasta. They feel like obvious foods. Neutral. Correct. But to billions of people around the world, some of those foods are bizarre, disgusting, wrong. Cheese, fermented, moldy, rotted dairy is revered in Europe and America, and considered deeply unappetizing in much of East and Southeast Asia. Insects, protein-dense, efficient, abundant, are eaten by roughly 2 billion people worldwide and treated as repulsive in the Western world. Dog meat, culturally taboo in most of the West, has been part of human diets in parts of Asia and Africa for thousands of years. None of these lines are drawn by logic. They are drawn by history, by geography, by whoever had power at the moment the rules were being written. You didn't decide that cows are food and hippos aren't. Someone decided it for you before you were born. And if you think that feeling of disgust you have about certain foods is just common sense, science has news for you. Psychologists call it the omnivore's dilemma. Humans are unique among animals because we can eat almost anything. We're biologically capable of surviving on an enormous range of foods. But that flexibility creates a problem. If you can eat almost anything, how do you know what's safe? How do you know what's food and what's poison? The answer your brain came up with is to copy the people around you. If the people who raised you eat it, it's food. If the people who raised you don't eat it, it triggers disgust, a deep, automatic, physical revulsion. This isn't a rational process, it's a survival shortcut, and it runs so deep that even when you know intellectually that something is safe to eat, even when you know it's nutritious, clean, and eaten by billions of people, your body can still refuse. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania put this to the test. They asked people to drink juice from a brand new, sterile, never used bedpan. The bedpan had been purchased that day. It had never been near a toilet. It was completely clean. People refused. Knowing the facts didn't matter. The feeling of disgust was stronger than logic. And that is what killed the American Hippo Bill. Not the facts, the feeling. So let's go back to the bayous of Louisiana for a moment. Because the Hippo Plan actually wasn't as crazy as it sounds, even from a practical standpoint. Hippos are remarkably well-suited to environments like the American South. Louisiana's wetlands are warm. They're full of water. They're full of aquatic plants. Hippos eat up to 150 pounds of grass and vegetation per night. A single hippo produces hundreds of pounds of meat. They reproduce. They're hardy. They don't need feedlots or grain or elaborate infrastructure. The agricultural logic was sound. The man who argued most passionately for the bill alongside Burnham was a Louisiana-born businessman named Fritz Duquesne, who had first-hand experience in Africa and had eaten hippo himself. He said Americans were leaving thousands of tons of free protein sitting in African rivers out of nothing but habit. He wasn't wrong. At the time, the United States was importing meat from South America to meet demand. It was spending enormous resources shipping cattle across oceans, and it refused to consider an animal that could walk itself into the nearest swamp. Now here's the part that should make you a little uncomfortable. Because the water hyacinth problem, it didn't go away. It got worse. Today, water hyacinth is considered one of the world's most destructive invasive species. It covers vast stretches of waterways across the American South, across Africa, across South and Southeast Asia. It blocks sunlight. It depletes oxygen. It kills fish. It disrupts entire ecosystems. Scientists, farmers, and governments have spent billions of dollars trying to control it over the past century, with chemicals, with insects, with machines. And they have never fully solved it. The hippo was never tried. Now, to be fair, releasing hippos into American waterways would have created its own chaos. A hippo that escapes a Louisiana bayou is not a minor problem. We already know what happens when large exotic animals get loose in the wrong environment. Colombia found out. When drug lord Pablo Escobar was killed in 1993, his private zoo was abandoned, including 4 hippos he had imported illegally from Africa. Those 4 hippos, left in the Colombian jungle, in a country with no natural hippo predators, are now somewhere between 80 and 100 animals. They have spread across the Magdalena River basin. Colombian scientists are calling them an ecological time bomb. Hippos are reshaping Colombian waterways, changing the chemistry of rivers, competing with native wildlife, spreading to new regions every year. Scientists estimate that without intervention, there could be hundreds of hippos in Colombia within decades. So perhaps the American Congress of 1910 dodged something. Perhaps releasing hippos into Louisiana would have created the very disaster it was trying to solve, just with a different animal. But here's the question that sticks with me, and maybe it sticks with you too. If the Hippo Bill had passed, if it had worked, would you be eating hippo burgers today? Would hippo feel as normal to you as chicken does now? Would you be looking at pictures of hippos in African rivers and thinking of steak? Almost certainly yes, because that is how normal works. Normal is not a fact. It is a habit old enough that you've forgotten it was ever a choice. The reason chicken is on your plate right now is not because chicken is obviously food. It's because of thousands of years of breeding, farming, trade, culture, and decisions made by people who are long dead. The reason hippo isn't on your plate is because a bill died in a congressional committee in 1910. That's it. That is the entire distance between normal and unthinkable, and this matters beyond hippos. Right now, the world is facing a protein problem. The global population is expected to reach nearly 10 billion people by 2050. Feeding that many people, especially with meat, will require resources the planet may not be able to provide. The land needed to raise cattle is already one of the leading drivers of deforestation. The water, the grain, the emissions. Scientists and food researchers are already looking for answers. Some are looking at insects, some are looking at lab-grown meat, some are looking at plants, and some are looking at animals that are already abundant, efficient, and edible, but that Western culture has simply decided not to eat. The question of what counts as food is not just a historical curiosity. It is one of the most important questions of the next century. And the people who will answer it will be fighting the same enemy that killed the Hippo Bill. Not logic. Disgust. Here is the truth that this whole story has been circling. Every meal you eat is the result of a decision someone else made. The animals that ended up in your food system. The animals that ended up in your heart as pets. The animals that ended up as symbols, as myths, as zoo exhibits. Those categories were not discovered. They were assigned. And the assignment was never neutral. It was made by people with power, with money, with cultural influence, with disgust in their hearts and profit on their minds. You feel certain things are food, and certain things aren't. That certainty feels like yours. But it isn't really yours at all. It was handed to you. And somewhere in an alternate timeline, a child is growing up eating hippo like it's the most normal thing in the world, wondering why on earth anyone would eat a cow.